Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look and installing the Demco diode wiring kit for a 2022 Ford Maverick. Now there's 5 main components when flat towing a vehicle, and on the vehicle side we'll start with the base plate, and the base plate is just going to attach to the frame of the vehicle, creating a solid mount to allow you to have your arms that are going to attach to your tow bar, and that's going to be your second component, which is going to be the connection point between the vehicle's base plate and the hitch on the RV. Now you also have your safety cables, which in case of an accidental disconnect are going to keep the vehicle attached to the RV. You also have a supplemental braking system, and right here we have our breakaway switch, so if the vehicle does become unhinged from the tow bar, it's going to pull the cable, putting the brakes on the vehicle, bringing it to a stop. That way it's not rolling down the highway. You also have your diode wiring, which you can see is going to be this umbilical that's going to transfer the light signals from the 7-pole on the RV to the 6-pole on the vehicle. And that way you have your running lights, your turn signals, and your brake lights. And that's just going to keep you safe and legal, letting people know behind you what you're doing. So what does diode wiring do? Well, many times when you see a flat-towed vehicle, you're going to see some magnetic lights that are stuck onto the vehicle, and that's going to transmit the running lights, brake lights, and turn signals to the back of the vehicle on those to let the people behind you know what you're doing. But if you flat tow your vehicle often, instead of having to run those lights and drape the cable over, you can tie into your factory lighting, and that way when you hook up your umbilical, it's already going to have that light signal transferring from the RV to the towed vehicle. Now those light signals are transmitted through this umbilical, and the kit is actually able to be purchased with or without the umbilical. Some of your tow bars will have them integrated or come with the umbilical, so depending on which tow bar you have, you may need to pick up the kit that has one. Now this kit you are going to be tying into the factory taillight wiring, which can stray people away, but really it's not too hard to do, and it's going to be nice because when you plug it in, you're going to be ready to go, your lights are going to transmit that signal, and when you're just driving the vehicle around, it's not going to interfere with anything, so it retains all your factory operating of those taillights. So there are other options available as far as a bulb and socket kit where you drill into the taillight and mount a separate bulb, and that way you don't have to tie into that taillight wiring, but sometimes that really opens it up to have moisture build up in your lens, and overall this is a pretty easy one to do. And in fact, we did the install here in our shop, and I'm going to walk you through how to get it done. Now we have our fascia off because we're in the process of getting this set up for a flat tow setup, and if you're doing the same thing, that's going to be a lot easier to get your wires ran. So what I've actually done is just kind of make sure that I have a little bit of extra wire here right on these mounts, and that's going to allow us to really tie this in, because if it's short, it's going to make it really hard to make those connections, so it's better to have just a little bit of extra. Now some braking systems are going to require to tie into your diode wiring, so if that's the case, you might want to route this up into the engine bay, just make a quick loop, and that way it's going to be also easier to tie into that. But if your braking system doesn't require that, no problem, we're going to just route this back. Now we also have a charge line here, which you can add on when you're doing a flat tow setup. It's just going to make sure that your vehicle is going to get charged while towing. That way when you get to the campsite or wherever your destination may be, your battery's not going to be dead and you're going to have to charge your towed vehicle. So you're also going to want to run this at least up to where we're going to be tying into the 6-pole, because this will go into our connector. Now as far as the rest of the diode wiring, it's just going to run back, and I highly recommend taking off the skid plates. It's going to make it a lot easier to run those wires, and just throughout the whole process, make sure that you're not touching anything that's hot, like the exhaust or any moving parts, whether it be an axle, suspension, sway bar, anything along those lines. So I've pulled mine up into the engine bay because of our braking system and just routed our way down, and you can see I've just used this subframe support to tie it up, and that way it's not going to make contact with the sway bar. And then I dropped down this underbody panel again just to make it easier, and plus once it's up here and the underbody panel goes back up, it's going to keep it in place. It's not going to be dangling down. So just making some zip tie connections along the frame rail here just to kind of keep it up in place. And then you'll see at this point I've pulled our white wire, I cut the 4-pole off and stripped this back, and that's so we can attach to this factory ground. And it's also going to be twofold, because that extra white wire we're going to be using to jump in between the diodes, between the taillights. So this is a good way to save yourself a little bit of extra wire. That way you don't have to pick up any extra. So this one seems to be a good grounding point, and it's also going to give us enough wire. Now from here, I also ran this up and made our split. So I have my green wire, I pulled that and separated it from the yellow and brown and just started to route this over using, again, some of the factory wire loom. You can see my zip ties here, kind of attached to some of the brackets, and then I've made it right here. And I've pulled this panel out just so we can run this up to our taillight. Now the other wires, since we split it, this is going to be going to our driver's side, our yellow and brown here. So I kind of just made my way over here. Now the muffler is right here, but we do need to get it in this pocket. So I think the way that I ran it here is going to keep it up to where it's not going to make contact, and we still have our wire going to where our taillight pocket is going to be. So since we'll be tying into our taillight wiring, we're going to want to go ahead and get our taillights out. So an 8mm socket, there's going to be 2 screws here, so we'll go ahead and get those removed. Then to get your taillight out, a lot of times they'll have clips. This one's pretty easy here. You just kind of wiggle it back and forth and it should separate pretty easily. So just take your time. You don't want to damage any clips or anything like that. So just kind of give it a little bit of pressure, work it back and forth, and those clips should pop out. So here's those clips. You can see kind of the angle that they sit. So pulling it kind of out towards myself here, you can see I'm kind of at the diagonal here. That should allow that to pop out. So if you're having trouble, you can see where these pop in. You can kind of put a little pressure on those spots specifically. So since we're going to be tying into the wiring, to make it this easier, we're going to go ahead, just unclip this, push that tab in, pull this out, and we can set our taillight aside. Now we need to pull back some of this insulation tape here, and that's going to allow us to get access to our wires. And something that I recommend is really pulling this back. There's a firm kind of hard line here that just kind of keeps these in place. You can kind of go all the way back there, and tying into the wiring back here is going to make it a lot easier, I think personally, to get this plugged back in. Sometimes when you put it this close, it's hard to kind of get some space here. So I'll go ahead and peel back our insulation. Now it can kind of be tricky, so if you're going to cut this, be very, very careful, obviously not to cut or damage any of the wires. So I've gone ahead and tested to make sure that we have our running light and also our brake and turn signal wire here. So you're going to want to grab your solid purple and then your white with green stripe. Now be very careful because there's also a purple with a green stripe, so make sure you're not grabbing that one. And just to double check yourself, it should be the number 1 and 2 pin. So if you kind of look up top here, should be these two. So what we're going to do is just go ahead and I'm going to make a cut right about here. And then we're just going to strip this back. And in the kit, there's actually 2 different color spade terminals, and it looks as if the purple one is a slightly smaller gauge wiring, which I think is going to be great for these. So we can save these for the wires that we pull up, but for now, we'll go ahead, we'll strip this back. And we can just put 1 spade terminal on each end of the wires here. So these are pretty small wires here, so you might want to just kind of twist them up, kind of get some of the frays out. That way you can feed this into the spade connector. And then once we have those fed in, we'll just go ahead and get these crimped down. And after every connection that you make, I always go ahead and just kind of give it a quick tug just to make sure that it is good, because it's very easy for these to kind of just pop out, and you don't want to have to go back and trace them. So just make sure that it's a nice solid connection there. So we'll go ahead and get the rest of the purple on these wires. Now we can fish wire up our brown and yellow wire, and you can actually see pretty easily through here. So to make it a little easier, you can use something to pull it up, whether it be a string or I have an airline tube here, and it just makes it a lot easier to route this wire up. So I'm going to feed this down, tape those wires, and then pull this up. We'll just pull up all of our extra slack here. And then at this point, obviously we have quite a bit of extra wire, so I'm going to just cut it right here, and that should give us plenty to work with. So now I'm going to go ahead and just strip back these ends here. Now I mentioned earlier the ground wire that I mounted up a little bit earlier, and this is the extra white wire that I have, and this is going to create a jumper between the two tail lights. So what I'm going to do is strip this back as well, because we're going to need this to tie into our brown wire. So what I'm going to do is go ahead, take the brown and the white wire. We're just going to twist this nice and tight, and that way we can get our spade connector on here. And then we can go ahead and put a spade terminal on our yellow as well. Now the extra white wire here, we can feed this back down as we're going to run this over to the other taillight. So you can go ahead and just pull that slack back out, just the same way that we routed the brown and yellow. So now that we have spade connectors on all of our wires that we're going to be tying into, we can go ahead and grab our diode. Now on the diode, you can see it's labeled in, and then out on the single one. The out is going to go to our plug to the tail light. So we'll go ahead and attach one here. And then we can actually go ahead and take the other diode and do the same thing. And our turn signal wire is going to be our yellow that we fed up, and this is going to tie into our white and green. So we can go ahead and just plug this in, and then we'll just take our other white and green wire that we have and make the other connection. Now it doesn't matter which one you put it on as far as the in, so we can go ahead and just slip this on. Our other diode, pretty similar. We're going to just take our purple, match that purple up to it, and then we'll have our white and brown. We're going to tie this in. Oh, so that's why we check. You can see how easily that fell out. So I'm going to go ahead and recrimp this and make sure that it's holding on well. So with that new spade connector on there, I'm going to go ahead and make these attachments. And I'm going to try to also make sure that our wires are staying nice and kind of organized here. So you can see we got these all attached. So what I'm going to do is just wrap this up with some electrical tape. You can zip tie it as well, it's up to you. But really just trying to make sure that these wires don't pull out. So running some tape here right before all the connections and also right after the connections here, that's going to kind of ensure that over time these aren't going to loosen up. It's going to keep the stress off the wires, so we can go ahead and do that. So now that we have all these tied up and nice and safe, we can go ahead and plug in our taillight and get this put back into place. You may need to tuck this into the pocket, but we have plenty of space to do that. Pop those pins back in. We'll tighten this up, and then we're going to go ahead, we'll route our white wire across and then start taking off the taillight on the passenger side. And you can see I do have some extra wire here that we tied into the driver's side. And after all, we get our passenger light in. I'm going to go back and just zip tie everything up so it's nice and clean. But I do want to show you the way that I routed our extra jumper wire. So I kind of just routed this down and passed it through this frame support here, and then just kind of use some of the frame portion of where the hitch is. So I'm going to go back and zip tie this up, but you can see it's got a nice open pocket here. You just want to make sure that it's zip tied so it stays away from not only your hitch receptacle but also your tire here as well. So I just routed it through this panel, and then just pulling off some of the screws, it's going to allow you to kind of have some access here. So I took the green, fed the white in, zip tied them up, and then I used the same fish wire technique to pull them up. Now our passenger side is going to be pretty similar to our driver's side, but the wires do change colors, so let's walk through that. You can see we have our orange with a white with an orange stripe. That's going to be our one side, and that's where our jumper wire, so our white one, is going to tie into. And then we also have, it's like a violet with a purple stripe. that's going to be tied into our green. So pretty easy again. We'll just make that attachment there with some tape, and then we'll get this plug back in. So we've got this back in place. I'm going to go ahead and tie up those wires with some zip ties, and then we're going to head up front and make our connection to our 6-pole. Now with our fascia reinstalled, we can go ahead and hook up our 6-pole. Now before cutting wires, you're going to want to make sure that you have the fuses taken out of your charge line if you have one, and also the power that's running to your braking system, because we are going to be cutting into these. We don't want electricity going through them. So what we're going to do is I've actually run a little bit of wire loom here just to kind of clean up some of this. That's up to you, but really find a spot where the wires are nice and even. This is obviously, I have plenty. So when I ran my wires, I made sure to leave some, but we can go ahead and cut these back. So now at this point, we're just going to go ahead and strip the ends back just a little bit so we can get our 6-pole all hooked up. So here we have our wire stripped back, and what I'm going to do is feed our boot on, and that way we can make our attachment, and this is going to kind of seal it up once we're done. So what we have on the back side of our plug is pretty simple. You have multiple different spots here, and you have a small flathead in order to loosen these up. Now I highly recommend don't back them out all the way, but pulling that screw back is going to allow us to put our wires in and then tighten them into place. Now there are labels here as to where to go. I'm going to hook mine up and then I'll walk you through where they all need to be. So I have them all attached here, and you're going to see arrows with letters pointing to the hole that you'll have the corresponding wire. So your right turn signal is going to be your green, your left turn signal will be your yellow, GD is going to be your ground for white, TM is going to be your tail markers, so your brown, and then in the center here, since we have a charge line, that's going to be your 12-volt accessory, so you can go ahead and get that on there. Now, before I cap this up, I'm going to take some dielectric grease just to kind of prevent moisture from damaging the wires and just kind of keep them healthy long term. So we can go ahead and goop some of that on. So now we can go ahead and take our boot and slide it on our 6-pole. And this is just going to protect it long term. So once we have this slipped on, what I'm going to do is take some electrical tape, and I'm going to just wrap it all around it just to make sure that it's sealed up properly. Now to mount this up, you can use your self-tappers and just kind of drill those in here just to kind of make that secure. But the kit comes with, or at least the base plate that we have, comes with this little bracket, which also allows us to have our breakaway cable here. So you may need to clear that spot for the breakaway cable to fit, and then use this bracket to line them all up. And also, this vehicle has the active vents to open and close for the radiator, so just make sure that your wires are also out of the way. You can zip tie them up to these plastic portions or the arms here just to make sure that you have clearance for those to still work. And then once you have that all done, you'll just go ahead with your self-tapping screw and zip this down. So now before we hit the road, all we need to do is test to make sure that it works. Now to test, we're using a test box to simulate hooking up to an RV, but you can also hook up to your RV and have that umbilical plugged in your 7-way, and then you're going to run through the light sequence on the RV. So we're going to start here with our left turn signal. Next we'll do our right turn signal. Then we'll do our running lights. And then finally our brake lights. With everything working properly, all that's left to do is finish up any of your flat tow components before hooking up, getting your car in flat tow mode, and hitting the road. And that was a look and installation of the Demco diode wiring for a towed vehicle on a 2022 Ford Maverick.